and just enjoy myself. So far,
I'm actually terrified. What the fuck is this? I've never been on this map.
At my college bookstore, and also trying to get through senior year of college. I was doing pretty fine until around February. That was when my roommate, I might as well dub him house cat, lost his job.
Hi.
I lost mine soon after, and I had to drop out to find a new one. Basically for this,
oh my god.
Floating. He basically started to
I didn't know what I was doing. I was too concentrated.
It freaked us all out, and I went to stay with a friend. I had 2 interviews. One with a local team agency, and the other was at a library.
Nice.
I was job right away,
something huge.
House cat made living at the apartment an absolute nightmare. Eventually, I had to get the co-sign.
And then I changed into a smaller version of the same thing, but like on the floor.
I was nervous for months because after this happened, I jumped
and then I changed into a red chair.
Really angry at me, and also at my
Wait, did you change?
Really, my
it looks like you moved.
His ex-girlfriend was also no help either.
Your box itself moved.
They blamed me for everything that happened. This had some repercussions to me. I was actually blacklisted from a lot of parties, which was fine.
I'll watch that. Oh, there goes the red chair.
And still barely have any of them to trust. I also really hate being home by myself. While he was living with me, the friend that he lashed out at, he actually knocked her to the floor and was holding her down. I was in the bathroom trying to cool off and then ran out when I heard a scream. I grabbed my phone and charger when my friend's dad came to come get us. We had just returned from a friend's graduation party. I was really stunned and scared of House Cat. Also, what made my situation really worse was that I have several allergies to certain foods, which also can be found in beer. I absolutely can't have it. I was really terrified because House Cat flaunted this in front of his hens, which made me stay in the room most nights. One of his friend's girlfriends decided to sneak some soda into my room, which we downed while playing my PS1 and Nintendo 64. The day that he was evicted, I was training at my temp job and I wasn't home at the time. He called via his father. When I got back to the apartment, the bed, his computer, and stereo were all gone. My roommates arrived afterward and I was really relieved. Hopefully I don't run into House Cats ever again. And as for the Colorado anime community, thanks for nothing. He really needed help, and you clearly value popularity over mental health. I'm really glad that I'll never be part of that again. I do still like anime, though. Obligatory happening college to start. During my sophomore year, I lived in the dorms, and I was assigned to a random roommate. He seemed a little bit introverted, but fairly normal at first, but he really wouldn't talk to me. I would try to start conversations about things that he showed interest in, but he would only give me one-word responses that were obviously meant to end the conversation. I figured that he probably just didn't like me, so I decided I would give him some space and just leave him alone. After a few days, it started. I would notice that he was always looking in my direction. I chalked it up to coincidence, but it just kept happening. Classes started up and I decided to spend less and less time in the room, but whenever I was there, he would always be constantly looking in my direction. When I would turn to face him, he would turn his head away, but it would always creep me out since it was pretty much constant. I also started to notice that he would lay on his bed to read, but he would hold the book or papers at an angle that always gave him a direct line of sight to me. About a week or so into the semester, my girlfriend at the time and I went on a morning hike and then crashed on my bed at around 2 p.m. We woke up to him just standing there and staring at us about 2 hours later. He didn't say anything, just turned and then exited out of the room. At that point, I decided I needed to leave before he killed me in my sleep and ate my face, and I was out of there pretty quickly. Fortunately, I didn't see him again for quite a while, but we ended up having a class together senior year. I've been telling my friends the story ever since it happened, and they didn't believe me. One of my friends had really poor vision, so we sat in the front row. Of course, every time I looked behind me, my old roommate was always staring directly at me. Not the teacher, but at me. It didn't matter if we were in the middle or one of the sides. I challenged all of my friends to look back during a single time during the semester and try and catch him not looking. Within about 5 classes, they all gave up and they agreed that he was staring at me nonstop and that it was super creepy. My parents think that he was in love with me, but I still think he just wanted to eat my face. I guess I'll never really know. Either way, dude was a major creep. So about 4 months back, I received a message from a guy who was interested in being roommates. He said that his name was M and he seemed super nice. We talked for about an hour and I told him that I would let him know the situation. I did inform him that I was no longer interested and I found another place. He responded that he would still like to be friends, and that's when I had a really strange gut feeling. It was a very bad gut feeling about this guy. I told him that I really apologized if I gave the wrong signal, but I really wasn't interested at all, like period. He texted me about a week later asking how I'm doing. I never responded. I then deleted his number and forgot about the whole thing. That is, until today, months later. I got a text from who I thought was a coworker. This friend had just changed her phone number. The text was asking how I was doing, and I said I was doing really good. They then went on to ask if I wanted to hang out and meet, and I said sure, but where? I genuinely thought that it was my friend. I kid you not, the phone numbers are off at the end by 1 digit. Suddenly on my way there, I then realized that I had no idea who this person was. I called them to see, and my heart absolutely dropped when I then recognized the dude's voice. I apologized and I told him that I actually thought he was someone else, my coworker. He completely lost his crap and totally freaked out on me, really angry. I apologized and I told him to please never contact me ever again, as I was not interested and I would definitely not be meeting him. He was really angry and I wished him a good day, then hung up. It was pretty wild. There are 3 people I'm going to refer to in this story. The roommate in question is Danny, his girlfriend is Veronica. They live with my partner Julia in Colorado in a 2-bedroom apartment.
I don't think so.
I also just want to add that my partner and I both are non-binary. We have a long-distance relationship and I try and fly out there as often as I can afford.
No.
Julia will be moving out of this apartment in January and has already found a new roommate. I found out this information late September during my last visit to Colorado.
Oh, hey.
I would like to write it down as a way to process it and try and get some input. Veronica is young, 19, and I believe Danny is also 19. Veronica approached me for advice for her relationship with Danny because she learned that I was 27. We sit outside on the patio of earshot of Danny, and she tells me about her insecurities in her relationship. Normal things. Am I attracted enough to him? Is he cheating on me? And so on. The whole time I'm just like, you're beautiful. Don't compare yourself to others. If he's cheating on you, you need to dump him. Veronica then tells me she goes through Danny's phone all the time. She's very paranoid and she believes that he's cheating.
Oh, there's only 2 of us? They're already chasing the other guy, fuck.
She's unearthed things on Danny's phone that made my skin crawl. Apparently Danny takes videos and pictures of random women in public. There's a video that Veronica found and actually confronted him with it. In the video, he zooms in on women's chests who's standing out at a train station. Danny, trying to defend himself, says, "Oh no, that's just Julia. They asked me to take a picture of them. Pretty weird, right?" This was before Veronica had met my partner, and that's how she caught Danny in his lie. The person in the recording was definitely not Julia. Even more paranoid, she decided to dig a little bit deeper. She found some more
I'm the last one.
photos and videos on his phone.
Oh, fuck.
I don't really feel comfortable describing the details. He likes to photograph a certain type of women. They're all different, but have specific features in common. She's actually been on him masturbating to these images. Veronica says that she's really embarrassed by his hobby, but shows no sign of stopping. I'm absolutely floored by all of this. My mind couldn't process what she had told me. And honestly,
I tried.
writing and thinking about this. I had no problems with Danny before this. He's a big, boisterous guy. young, so he's sort of a friend, but it's not like we're really friends. This moment changed that immediately, and I then thought back on all of the red flags that I could have missed. Veronica is visibly on the brink of crime now. I'm condensing my response here. Danny is a creep, and this is not normal behavior. I feel tremendously guilty. Can Veronica even report him for this? Can I report him even if I haven't seen the photos? Veronica is still dating Danny, so I really doubt she would want to. I don't believe that she made this up, though, because of how upset this made her. She even told her dad about it, who also said that it was messed up. I mean, it bothered her enough to tell me, who's no more than an acquaintance to her. I decided to tell Julia all about this after a really long day of waiting for them to get home from work, and Julia got physically ill when I told them about Danny. I'm fairly certain that learning this information has really impacted Julia's decision of not renewing a lease with Danny. I really do want to visit Julia in December, but I don't want to see Danny ever again. I feel absolutely disgusted and so uncomfortable. I feel so terrible for all of those people in the photos and videos. Danny is a seriously disgusting person. I just started my freshman year of college. I'm going to a college out of my home state, and no one I know is going to the same university as me, which means that I'm going to be rooming with a total stranger. Pretty normal, right? Well, that's what I thought. When I met my roommate,
Cartel or
she referred to me as DJ. She seemed nice enough. Her parents seemed nice enough too. Everything was fine for the first couple of weeks, but then DJ's odd habits began emerging. I noticed that every time I would sit at my desk, she would always move from wherever she was to sit on the floor right behind me. And I mean every time. The first few times I thought it was just coincidental because it happened when she would be entering the room from her last classes. I thought that maybe she just wanted to relax by sitting on the floor. Weird, yes, but plausible. But no. Then the other scenarios began happening. She has a beanbag set right by next to me, so close that it's touching me, and this is her favorite spot that she always sits there to do her homework and whatnot. If I decide I want to sit at my desk, she'll actually move from the beanbag and then the floor behind me. Sometimes she doesn't even do anything. She'll just sit there. She abandons her homework to sit behind me. I don't really sit at my desk too often anymore because of this very reason. DJ also has a job that she has to get to by 8 a.m. every week, which means that I typically get woken up very early. I usually just roll over and try to get some extra sleep. A couple of times now, though, I've actually woken up to DJ staring at me. One time she was about a foot away from the bed, just staring. She also makes a point to look at me whenever she leaves. But it doesn't end there. I'm utterly disgusted by hair, right? Like it actually makes me sick to my stomach whenever I see hair all over the floor. Well, DJ has this really long, curly red hair, which is fine, only she sheds so much hair that I've seen her actually sit there and pull her hair out. Okay, whatever. But one day I decided that I wanted to wash my sheets. I don't even sleep with my sheets. I'll typically only sleep with a throw blanket or only my comforter. I really never go under my sheets, but I do lay on top of them, so they still deserve to be washed. When I pulled back the sheet, I was then met with strings of DJ's long curly hair. I nearly threw up over it.
That's actually creepy.
I have no idea how it got there, and I'm not really sure I want to know. But hold on, it gets better. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, DJ and I share the same class together. Whenever class ends, she sits there and waits for me to pack up my notebooks and things, and then we walk back to our room together. Only, here's what's strange. She never tries to talk to me. She usually just walks like about 2 feet right behind me. By itself, that probably seems kind of normal, but with everything else, it just sort of feels like she's watching me. Perhaps not the creepiest story out there, but still very unnerving for me personally. This occurred over the last couple of days, as I moved in with a friend on Christmas Eve, and the other temporary housemate went from pleasant old man stoner to actually drugging my friend and attempting to drug me. I'm a female. The friend and I both are in our mid-20s, and the temporary housemate is in his 60s. So due to my own circumstances, I needed a new place to stay, and a friend Jimmy needed a reliable housemate to replace the old one who had left a few weeks before. I got approval from the real estate agent and shortly
I hate turning left, I swear to God.
The old housemate had invited
I just tried throwing a flashbang somewhere and it went the complete opposite direction.
2 days before Christmas for painting the bathroom wall with feces while drunk and high. And the other who seemed like a perfectly normal old man who just enjoyed the odd drink and a little bit of weed. The housemate is known as Bible Man, as he was also a recent convert to Christianity, and apparently he believes the rapture
one of the silver
happened
canisters.
sometime in 2020. So after a really fun Christmas and Boxing Day with the family, I returned home to hang out with Jimmy. We were looking at memes when Bible Man then barges into the room. He has no concept of boundaries, and he's been doing this for the 2 nights that I'd already spent there. Bible Man both looked and acted pretty wasted. He also seemed high, but claimed that he had only had 2 beers. He also didn't have any money to even buy those beers. He called out to Jimmy and he told him to come with him to the kitchen. Jimmy complied, and Bible Man insisted that he drink some whiskey from a glass. Jimmy tried to refuse, but just gave in and took a drink. Bible Man then came and tried to offer me a joint, which I absolutely refused, but he rolled anyway. Jimmy came back into the room and we looked at more of the memes for a while. Then Bible Man came back and tried to call Jimmy out to fix something. We tried to ask what it was that was broken, but he refused to say what it was. Jimmy left to go check it out, and Bible Man came back into the room and then tried to push the joint right into my hand. He forced himself into my personal space and whispered into my ear to hide it from Jimmy, then left. There was nothing to fix. After a couple of hours, Jimmy started to feel really tingly and sleepy. He went to go lay down, and Bible Man jumped at the chance to be alone in the room with me. He starts going on about how he knows Jimmy has hepatitis and that I shouldn't sleep with him, and also how he was sinning and bumming with the other temporary housemate who painted the walls, and a lot of other nonsense that was really hardly understandable. Over the next couple of hours, Bible would check on Jimmy, which was not normal behavior, while also turning the stereo up as high as it went, telling me how I forget how beautiful I am and trying to convince me to smoke the joint that he had made. I eventually went to Jimmy's room to ask him for some help to try and get Bible Man to leave me alone. Jimmy had to ask me to turn out his lights as he couldn't get up and he looked very tired and confused. At one point, Bible Man began to rant about Christmas Eve, saying that Jimmy had shut off the doors and declaring that he was going to screw me. Also how I shouldn't be friends with Jimmy and I should be afraid to sleep at night. The look on his face when he said it actually made me afraid to sleep that night. But not afraid of Jimmy, afraid of Bible Man. He also got into my personal bubble multiple times and accidentally touches my breasts. Keyword accidentally. I eventually convinced him to leave me alone and then pushed the box.
I accidentally found 2 different people.
I still wasn't able to
Oh, it's the
sleep
silver
for hours that
canister guy. Should've known.
As he never went out to smoke, I'm absolutely convinced that he had spiked a joint or had some other kind of ill intent. The way that he pushed and begged me to smoke, it was just way too creepy. And I don't do any kind of drugs, so it's not like it was a normal thing that he knew I did or something. The next morning, Jimmy had told me that he had a really patchy memory of the whole afternoon and evening, even though what Bible Man had given him was the only thing he had drunk all day. We were both really uncomfortable and really upset at his behavior. After talking about it, we realized that he was far too drunk to only have had 2 beers, and we were thinking that he had shoplifted from the bottle shop. But then the dread hit me. I looked into the container where we put our rent money. There was $50 from the rent that was missing, and only I and Jimmy had put our rent in. So angry and really upset, we decided to get Jimmy's scary-looking dad to come on over and convince Bible Man that it was time for him to leave. He came back later in the evening, and we still had to use the threat of calling Jimmy's dad to convince him to take his stuff and get out of there. I feel really bad about turfing him out at night, but it's summer in Australia.
I don't know who has 2 beers. I don't like beer.
After talking with some people in the bottle shop and a taxi driver and security guard who all knew him,
Was that you that just
stealing the last few
is a little
days,
sack?
he was actually in prison for a pretty good reason. soda Bible.
Oh, you're a chicken, okay.
Really sketchy
I'm a giant blue barrel.
And tried to drug me. Hopefully we don't have to see you ever again.
But I haven't seen anyone, surprisingly.
To give the context of where this story is based, I live in a smallish college town near a small to medium-sized city.
I don't know if you are.
The town itself doesn't have
I'm near the big building.
and is mostly here to cater to the demand.
Are you hiding in the grass?
Because of
Oh, then you might be over here with me.
24/7.
I'm up against the wall.
Be able to impulse buy whatever they like. The other big seller around here is gas. Of course, gas can be bought in the city, but being a town that is often gone through in order to get to the city, a lot of places will try to keep the price of gas slightly lower than any of the stations
Nope.
in the city.
I'm not dealing with that.
My story begins when I was working overnights at a gas station / liquor store.
Hey, we're in the grass together.
College, but mostly doing classes on the way so that they wouldn't run my availability for a full-time job. The store that I worked at had only one person working on overnights for
There's only 3 of us left. I should probably actually leave you, so you have more of a chance to live.
cameras and the fact that you don't always get
Oh yeah, someone spotted me. I'm getting chased.
gas station in the middle of the night. The owner's hand was forced on one night before I started working there that a woman who came in to buy milk went outside to her car only for a man to come up behind her and then shove a gun up to her back, then demanding her for money. She complied with him, and luckily, he let her go. She ran into the store sobbing hysterically, and though the police arrived shortly after, he was never found. I personally preferred to having 2 people on with me, even if there wasn't a safety issue.
Oh god, there's 2 people on me. No!
And it was really nice that the person I normally close with got along with me so well. Overall, there were 4 overnight shift workers. Josh, Nick, Dixie, and myself.
Oh my living god, no! I got pinched there.
I work about 2 nights a week with either Josh or I. Josh and I work together.
You only got 40 seconds, so...
And Nick worked with Josh or I.
No, I'm listening.
A week.
Oh. I think Art left.
Dixie was really nice and fun to be around, but she didn't really particularly like the job or really want to be there. Josh would get annoyed with her a lot for just standing behind the register while he did all the work, but it was only 1 night a week, so he didn't really complain too much. Nick, on the other hand, was a little bit different. He worked there 5 days a week, just like Josh and I, but they never seemed to put him with more than one person 1 day a week. Nobody seemed to really like him or like working with him. Nick was also off from the start. He was one of those people who basically told you his entire life story as soon as he met you, giving a bunch of really personal details that no one was really comfortable with hearing. One thing that he always
It's always the chicken man.
that was on his marriage. Apparently, he had a really bad drinking and drug problem for a very long time, and the drug part got better when he could switch over to weed, but he couldn't seem to get his drinking under control. He was hard to be around, but you kind of get used to the people in that kind of job being sketchy. I was there for almost 3 months when Nick's story seemed to escalate out of nowhere. He began telling people that when he was younger, he was diagnosed as a psychopath, and he had to take a bunch of pills for it every day so he wouldn't be violent. Not exactly what you want to hear from someone you're alone with in the middle of the night, but okay. We all have our problems, and some people get dealt a hand when it comes to mental illness. I myself have always really struggled to get my anxiety and depression under control.
Firestone tires were built for getting out there. Try them yourself for 90 days.
And without medicine, I mean, I wouldn't be killing people by any means, but I'd probably be hospitalized in danger to self categories. So as creepy as that was, I just assured
thanks,
them
Art.
that a lot of people need
And my controller is turning hardcore left,
and as
man.
long as you stick with it and you're honest with medical professionals, there's no reason you can't still do anything anyone else can do. He seemed really pleased with this answer, and soon after, the subject was then turned to other things. He was especially cheery and nice to me after that for about the next week or so, letting me know daily that he was taking his medicine and he felt like things were really going well with them. I always answered enthusiastically, but I'm pretty sure everyone, especially Josh, was aware of how much I wished that he would just stop talking to me about it and would really just leave me alone. Josh had a wife and daughter who was about 2 at the time, so he couldn't help but to see us younger girls as kind of like his daughter and what she might have to deal with one day. He also seemed to go out of his way to end my conversations with Nick rather quickly, which I was really grateful for, and he didn't really try to pretend that he liked Nick. It wasn't too long before Nick had started conversations with me going into details about why I was diagnosed instead of how his medicine was working, which I won't get into because a lot of it was very violent and sexual. I told him repeatedly that I really didn't want to know about that.
Listening to horror stories while I'm playing.
And then changed the subject, only for him to circle back to it about an hour later.
And my controller likes to turn left hardcore now.
About it, she told me that she would take care of it. She later told her friend about it, which was the same manager who asked her to come work there. The manager said she couldn't really do much, since I seemed to be the only one that he would talk to about these things. It was starting to get increasingly tense for everyone working with him after he was talked to by the manager. And soon enough, about 2 other women who had worked with him on the night shift reported comments that he made to them to the manager. I was questioned, in which I agreed that all of the statements made by the women were pretty similar to the things that had been said to me. Nick was then given a final warning and a write-up. The next couple of times I saw him, he would go on these rants about how the people that were reporting him only did it because they didn't like him. I assumed that he didn't know that I had a question too, and neither I or Josh had any intention to tell him. He got so angry at one point that he was practically in tears, saying how those lucky whores were really lucky that he was on his meds and what he would do to them if he wasn't. Luckily, it was about that point that his shift had ended, and pretty much as soon as he clocked out, Josh then told him that we had a lot of work to get done that night, so we really didn't have time to chat with him. He nodded and walked out the door without another word. Josh wasn't lying either. The truck had arrived extremely late that day, so there was still quite a bit of things that still needed to be put on the shelf. One thing that the earlier shifts never seemed to do unless they absolutely had to was stocking the drink coolers.
Time's against us.
It was true that it was easier to do at night when there was a lot less customers, so it was pretty annoying since we couldn't chat, but we just went with it. I can't really remember the time that Josh
No one's in the grass over there,
but
okay.
it must have been pretty late since we had been there for a while at that point. I was still pretty focused on stocking all of the shelves and making sure everything looked full if we didn't have it, when the bell had chimed, signaling that someone
Oh,
had come
fucking chicken. Fuck you, chicken.
I threw out a good evening and said that I'd be right there, since anyone that usually came in that late usually just wanted a pack of cigarettes or to pay for gas. I put down my box and went to the registers, slowing dramatically once I could see them. You guessed it. There was Nick, not looking at me, but leaning over to my register.
Don't let the search team
I'd be lying if I said I had a reason to be afraid.
What?
It did turn out I
Perfect.
was drunk,
Running.
but I wasn't
I have one place I can
right
go.
away, as the smell of booze always seemed to linger in the air around there anyways. And Josh was right on the other side of the wall. Even so, I actually considered for about 30 seconds if I should actually go or if I should run into the cooler and go get Josh. Nick wasn't a young fit guy or anything, but years of drugs and drinking had really aged him prematurely and totally ruined his body. But I mean, he was still pretty intimidating to a 20-year-old girl. Unfortunately, Nick made the decision for me when, probably tired of waiting, turned right toward me, and that's when I noticed something immediately was off about him. My voice was nothing more than a pathetic whisper when I asked him what he wanted. He just stared at me. There was nothing on his face to tell me what he was thinking. I was about to speak again when he then spoke, barely intelligible because of his slurring.
Did he leave you alone?
It took me a second to shake my head and tell him in a hopefully steady voice that Josh was in the cooler, and then I asked if he wanted me to go get him. And once again, he was just staring at me in silence. At this point, I didn't even care what he said. I just wanted him to say something. The silent staring was really creeping me out.
I'm a big blue barrel again, sitting at the same spot.
More force in my voice. What do you want, Nick? As soon as I stopped speaking, he then grinned at me in a really disgusting, almost singing voice. Then he said,
You're lying. I know you're alone.
He laughed and then he took a step toward me but stumbled, allowing me to take several steps backwards. At this point, I should have just run to Josh. I should have called for him. Really anything, but I really couldn't believe that I was reading the situation right. I mean, Nick was really weird, but I had never felt like I was in actual danger around him. He had never come off as more than a little unstable. He continued to come forward in slow, stumbling steps, then saying,
Come here. I just want to talk.
I kept out of his reach, telling him to back off and that I would hurt him if I had to. He thought that was specifically amusing, and he laughed loudly enough that Josh had told me later was what caused him to look through the spaces of the racks to see what was going on. Josh was out the door in a second.
There was like 5 of them over here at one time, all running around in different directions.
Nick and I. They didn't even say anything. They just stared each other down before Josh then said in a really stern tone, I think you should leave now. Nick just blankly stared for a moment, then scoffed, then telling us that we couldn't take a joke. I was trying not to cry at this point. The only thing more terrifying about the situation was knowing that if Josh hadn't been there and had somehow caught me, I would have stood no chance against Nick. Josh left me standing with my back against the wall, corraling Nick to the door. Completely unexpected on both of our parts, Nick then turned and then took a swing at Josh. Luckily, either because he was drunk or really uncoordinated, he missed Josh's face and Josh then grabbed the back of his coat and then brought him down as he then smashed his knee into Nick's stomach or chest area.
Someone else just died.
I'm not really sure which.
Someone's still
but
moving.
He used the opportunity of his sputtering
The watchtower.
to the door and then throw him out, now locking it. Josh had just turned and he told me to call the cops as we then heard this sickening crack from behind him. We both jumped and looked at the door to then find this really big circle of glass. It's hard to explain, but if you've ever seen a movie or one of an actual car wreck when something hits a windshield, but not hard enough to break through, and it turns wide all around the point of impact, that's what the door looked like. Josh didn't have to tell me what to do. This time I ran to the register, grabbed my phone, going to the corner farthest away from the front door, and then huddled on the floor. I didn't even notice at the time, but Josh had told me later that when he turned to see the glass, that was the first time that he noticed that Nick had a knife in his other hand. The fact that he tried to punch Josh instead of stab him is a mystery and a miracle. I was absolutely sobbing when the operator picked up the phone. I don't even know how she understood me. I was crying so loud. But between my distress and the sounds of Josh and Nick yelling at each other in the background, with loud smashes of Nick hitting the floor, she got the urgency of the situation. She asked me where I was, and luckily she knew the address, because just as I got up to look at a receipt to what the address was, the glass smashed. I dropped back to the floor, and she told me that the officers were already on the way, and to do whatever I could to get away, or even hide, even if that meant that I had to leave Josh. The hole wasn't big enough for him to get through, but he made it by grabbing the ashtray from outside, and then throwing it at the part of the window that he had been repeatedly punching, causing it to break through. He didn't make it to break through, though. From that hole, he could reach the lock on the door, then get back inside. According to Josh, he had walked up to the door, and then he put his mouth against the hole that he had just formed, and then said something that, even right now, I still sob over. And that horrible sing-song
I still failed, you wheelbarrow son of a bitch.
He then said in such a happy tone,
They're never going to find you.
Needless to say, as tough as he was acting, Josh was shitting bricks just as much as I was. He was older than Nick, in his mid-30s, but he was a beanpole, and he wasn't exactly known for his fighting skills. Even so, as soon as Nick unlocked
There's a
and started
wheelbarrow
opening the
somewhere
door,
over here.
Josh then slammed his entire body into it, knocking Nick backwards from the impact. Josh then yelled for me to run, and even though my legs felt like they would give out at any moment, I ran right behind him to the receiving doors that were in the back of the store. Nick was cursing and yelling for us as the door jingle went off. Josh slammed into the back door, cursing in pain, as he then realized that it wouldn't open. We found out later that Nick had pushed the dumpster in front of the door, locking the wheels of it again before he came in. We seemed to both realize at once that he had actually planned this all out to kill us. Nick rounded the corner, still doing that awkward stumbling walk, though faster now. It at least gave me some time to slam the back room door shut and then lock it.
Hey, okay.
I was sitting in front of it, Josh bringing everything behind to the door shut, when Nick then finally reached it. He must have heard me crying because he kept calling my name, telling me that I wasn't who he wanted. He would make sure that I died before I felt any kind of pain if I opened the door for him. He then started stabbing the door, then screaming at me to open it. I screamed, and then I moved when he stabbed it the first time, but Josh and I both then moved immediately to hold it shut again. I remember Josh and I making eye contact. We were both crying by now, and I wanted so badly to say something to comfort him, but I just couldn't think of anything to say. I was just as terrified myself. I had dropped my phone when I ran to hold the door shut, and neither of us could move to go get it. So we really had no idea how long it would be until the police got there, and the door was made of wood, so it wouldn't really last long against his body slams. And there was absolutely no protection if his knife went into one of our hands. All I could think about was that I was going to die here tonight. Then my dog would never know why I didn't come home. That I would never get my degree and have enough money to actually start enjoying life. That all of the plans for the future that my girlfriend and I had made would never happen. In the most anticlimactic and wonderful finish ever, it suddenly went silent. There was no police car alarms, no yelling, nothing. It was as if Nick had just vanished. Josh and I looked at each other, not even daring to breathe, then listening for any sign of life on the other side of the door. We both slammed to the ground when we heard a gunshot then go off once, then twice, then a third time. There was more silence. Then at last, a voice rang out, then asking if anyone was here. We weren't really sure if we should say anything. Then the voice continued with his name, and that he was an off-duty EMT who had been listening to the scanner. Josh got up and pushed all of the things aside in front of the door, opening it enough just to put his head out of it. And then it seemed like all of the breath just totally left him. He opened the door and went out into the store.
Should I stun myself? Or he stunned me, or stun myself. Fucking chicken.
Or the dispatcher had hung up. When I went out into the store where Josh and our rescuer was, he was in the middle of explaining that the police over the scanner were sending a bunch of cars, but that they were all pretty far away, and he had a really weird feeling that they wouldn't get there in time when the dispatcher was telling them what they'd find when they got there. He didn't want either of us to go outside until the police got there because though Nick had been shot in the shoulder, he still had the knife when he took off. The EMT said that he would have run after him, but with the state that the store was in, he was really scared that someone in the store could be dying or hurt. The next 20 minutes were a total blur. Josh and I were just sitting on the floor hugging each other when the police finally arrived. The EMT had called dispatch and he told them of the new situation, and most of the cars that were coming to our location were then diverted to looking for Nick. It was soon after that Josh got to use his phone to call his wife, and she came right over, only bringing their daughter because he begged her to. He seemed to completely break down when he held his daughter and hugged his wife. I had an extremely similar
probably
reaction
good too.
when I finally got to go home and came in to see my dog's wiggling body as he was so excited to see me. Nick was found about 2 weeks later in an old RV that he had in the woods. The reason that he had come after us was because he thought that the reason Josh wanted him to leave so quickly was so that he could call the owner again, and this time the complaint would get him fired. Unknown to us, his wife had actually kicked him out about 4 days before this all happened, and she was actually in the process of getting a restraining order against him, due to a bunch of threatening texts and phone calls that she had been getting. Nick stated to the police that his job was all that he had left, and Josh needed to be punished for trying to take that away from him. He said that I wasn't the target and he really didn't want to have to kill me, but he knew that he had a much better chance of killing Josh with me there than Dixie, since Josh would be more likely to face him to protect me. Neither Josh or I called an owner or even a manager over his comments that night, though maybe we should have. It was really disturbing what he was saying in hindsight, but we were so used to him being a creep and saying really horrible things that it didn't even register to us that he could be serious about trying to hurt someone. I had known him for 3 months and Josh had known him for 6, and he had never done anything violent toward anyone. Everyone just thought he was...
See ya, Art. Have a good night.
We also put faith in the fact that every employee had
Me
a
and Yoke
background
are gonna
check
get
on them
off
before
soon
they were
too.
hired. So, I mean, it's not like Nick had ever been violent before.
I'm just listening to
Nick took a plea deal.
some horror
He did this
stories
so that the 2
from
counts of attempted murder would be
Southern
dropped. He
Cannibal.
instead would go to a mental hospital for offenders. The reason that I'm writing this story now is that I got a phone call about 2 weeks ago. It was basically notifying me that as long as there's no setbacks to his health, Nick is actually set to be released on June 8th of this year. When I called Josh, he said that he had received the same news the day before. Neither Josh or I work there anymore, and Josh has since moved away to another town on the other side of the city. I've switched to going to college completely online, and I'm in a new place that I'm renting with a roommate. I really don't think that he'll ever come after either of us. I don't see how he could blame us for what happened. I read so many of these stories, and after the fact, everyone always seems so prepared for what to do if they ever see the person they're writing about again. I really don't think that I'd be any more prepared to face him this time than I was back then. I've had some pretty intense nightmares ever since that day, but ever since I got that call, every time I close my eyes, all I can hear is that one sentence louder and clearer than I've ever heard it since it was actually said. They're never going to find you two. Nick, if it's really true that you were diagnosed as a psychopath, I hope you're getting the help you need. You already destroyed my peace of mind, and even now, years later, I never feel safe, especially at night. I'm honestly gonna do my best to move on from this, but I just don't know how. Wish me luck. I've never really told this story, at least not completely.
I don't know
But
where to
it's something
go.
I still think about from time to time. It kind of haunts me. I used to work as a manager of a fast food place in a rather seedy part of a medium-sized city.
That's right.
I moved to a nicer location until they decided to transfer me. And there were actually rumors that the location I ended up being sent to was going to be shut down, which did end up happening a few years after I left. Anyway, the point is that the place wasn't being well taken care of.
Aw.
The dining room was really dated and old, and the owners were certainly not updating.
I was a giant block of,
They were just barely
cinder
maintaining
block?
the very basic safety requirements, and sometimes they weren't even doing
so I
that.
kind of knew I wasn't gonna make it too
For
long.
example, I often worked the closing shift, which for this location at the time was 4 p.m. to midnight. Between 7 p.m. and 11 p.m., it was running the drive-thru in the front room all by myself, and then one employee.
That's actually a great spot.
At 11 p.m., that other employee would go home, and I was left by myself to tidy up and then do the deposit around 11 p.m. to 12 p.m. This isn't really safe, and I'm really not even sure if it was entirely legal at the time. This was over a decade ago, though, so who really knows? Just to provide a little context and background here, I'm a girl, but I'm not what you would consider small. I'm about 6 foot. And during this time, I think people would probably say that I came across as a little more than stern. I was younger, but I'd already spent years working in fast food, constantly getting treated like crap by customers, as well as having drinks and food thrown at me. The location that I worked at was absolutely riddled with junkies and drug dealers, and just general, really scary behavior. All this to say, I didn't really get ruffled that easily, and
Wait,
I
is there
took a lot
2
of
of
things in
them?
stride.
Is that actually 2 of them?
However, on this night,
It is 2 of
I was
them.
working the night
There's
shift
2
with
of
the
them
new
sitting
guy.
right next to each other. They're like red toolbox
For
thingies.
no more than a few weeks. I'd worked with him a few times before,
And-
but never.
And they're just sitting next to each other.
And from the first time I'd met him, I'd always got this really strange vibe from him. And again, I'm not someone who got ruffled up easily. Prior to this, I'd actually worked with a night janitor at the other location, who'd had an Adderall addiction and a rather unpredictable and scary rage problem. And some creepy incel kid who barely spoke more than 2 words at a time. And when he did, it was always something about how
Oh,
much he
no.
disliked women, and me in particular.
They found, they scattered and changed.
But this guy, this new dude, he was a whole different level of weird. He had a kid and he professed to be a single father. He would bring the kid around work during the day, and the kid in his clothing were always
Oh,
really
he's
dirty.
dead.
Like really dirty. And not only that, but the kid also occasionally had bruises on his head and arms. The kid was a toddler, and I know that toddlers can get into things, but one look at that kid, and I just knew that those bruises were not something from a little kid just messing around. Now, I never saw the new guy behave aggressively toward his kid like at all, but I don't know.
How do you not find that suspicious?
And that feeling translated into other things.
Mission clock expired.
I don't know. He was just really creepy. It wasn't one thing in particular. It was just a feeling I got whenever I was around him. He was a medium-height, stocky young guy. He was totally average in every way, but he just had this really weird vibe about him. He was always really friendly, never rude or aggressive, but his eyes are just lifeless, for a lack of a better description. Anyway, on this night in particular, I think that he might have been called in to cover a shift for someone else. Most of the time, I was in charge of making the schedules, so I'm pretty sure that I wouldn't have scheduled him to work with me since I found him so off-putting. The first part of the night was fairly normal. I ran the drive-thru in the front counter, and he ran the kitchen between 8 to 11 p.m. He was talking to me on and off between orders, telling me about his ex and how he'd become a single father. Apparently, the mother of his child had a drug problem. In hindsight, I think a lot of what he said was meant to inspire sympathy. He really laid the troubled tale of him and his son on thick. But at the time, I just felt a little bad for both of them. Especially his kid, who I suspected was being abused. But despite being seen as stern, I was definitely still young and naive whenever it came to manipulative people. He told me that he moved to the city and pretty much immediately had trouble finding work prior to getting a job at the place we worked at. He said that he'd been running out of money and was really behind on rent, bills, and didn't have any formula for a son. At the time, I think I just empathized with him and I told him that it sucked. I mean, we were both working in fast food, so I thought it was pretty obvious that neither of us had any money. The place was bare bones minimum wage, and I was barely getting by with 3 roommates. And I was pretty much only eating the free meal that I was given a day from the restaurant. Anyway, he laid it on thick pretty much all night long. But I really don't know that I was really paying all that much attention to it. People tended to ramble whenever working the late shift, and I'd gotten pretty used to listening to people spontaneously talk about their personal problems. I kind of had a habit of just listening and not really reciprocating the sharing. And I guess this didn't really go over very well with the new guy. At some point, the new guy then said something to the effect of,
"You don't talk much, do you? I'm telling you my whole life story here and you've got nothing to say?"
Now, I don't know if it was just that I was coming across as unsympathetic, or more likely that he was really just frustrated that he wasn't manipulating me into giving up personal details about my life. As far as I was concerned, he was just someone I worked with, and I didn't know him. I didn't really want him to know me, and I certainly wasn't about to tell him anything that wasn't surface-level chit-chat. But the guy was really intimidating. Something about his tone was just really off. It definitely wasn't a jokey accusation or off-the-cuff comment. I can't really remember exactly what I said, but I remember that I just tried to play it off somehow. He didn't really say anything else about it, but after that happened, the silence between us seemed a little tense. At 11 p.m., it was time for him to go home.
Only one prop left.
The normal procedure was the person closing the kitchen would tidy up their area, and then an actual kitchen cleaner would come back in a couple hours later to deep clean things. In our case, it was a husband and wife team who did several locations, but they didn't usually come in until a few hours after I left.
Continue on mission.
So this guy was only tasked with basic tidy, and then I would let him out, after which I would stay behind to prepare the deposit.
Switching sides.
But instead of this happening smoothly, this guy then goes into the staff bathroom and stays there. And I mean for a really long time, like almost 20 minutes or something. I didn't know what was going on, nor did I know exactly how to handle it. It had honestly never happened before. People could usually not get out of there fast enough at the end of the night. Was he sick? Did he fall asleep? I didn't know, but I really just wanted to get my work done and go home. He finally emerged and then quickly walked to the door and left. I was relieved. It was weird, but I just shrugged it off and hurried back to the office to get done what I needed to get done. Not 10 minutes later, I start to hear a really loud banging at the back door of the restaurant, repeatedly. Now, normally I would just ignore this. The back door faced an alley and it was right next to a street full of bars and pubs. People leaving bars and pubs often got the idea that banging on the door would get them after-hours fast food service because, well, they were drunk. So this wasn't necessarily uncommon. So I decided to just ignore it and keep hurrying to get things done. But I kid you not, the banging didn't stop. It somehow just seemed to get louder and louder and more urgent. So I finally got up and went to look out the peephole to see who was there. At this point, I was definitely on edge. And this edginess swelled into a full-out anxiety attack when I see that it's the new guy standing at the back door. My first thought was not to open the door. I really didn't want to open the door, but I knew that he knew that I was in there. What if he forgot something inside? What if it was his house keys, car keys, or something important? I was going to have to leave the building by that same door at some point, so there really seemed to be no escaping him. So reluctantly, I opened the door. What I opened the door to was, quite frankly, absolutely terrifying to me. He said that he left his jacket inside the store, and I told him to tell me where and I'd go get it. I just really didn't want him to come inside. Now, if this had been any other person that I worked with normally, this wouldn't be a big deal. I'd let them back in, let them get whatever they left behind, and they'd take off. But I instinctively knew that I didn't want this dude back inside in the dark, empty restaurant all alone with me. But the new dude was totally not having it. He pushed past me and said he'd get it himself. Then he proceeded to shut himself in the bathroom again. And at this point, I just panicked. Instead of just staying there by the door, which in hindsight I probably should have done, I rushed back to the office. I know I'm stupid. Stupid girl, which is me, had left some of the cash that I was counting for the deposit out. What dummy would answer the back door at night at all? And especially with the till out? Well, I guess my dumbass. I managed to stuff the cash in the safe and then lock it before he came to find me. The office was dark. It was summer and the air conditioning was on full blast, but this dude was sweating a crap ton. I was taller than him and I'm not a small girl, but somehow I just knew that this guy was about to hurt me. He was keyed up. As I watched his eyes dart around the office, I then grabbed my jacket, which was hanging on the hook next to me. I hadn't finished my deposit, but I didn't care. I was gonna get out of there. I didn't care how much crap I got into in the morning for my work not being done. I smiled and told him that I was just leaving and that he could help me out. I was really just trying my best not to show my hand. Whatever he had planned, I wanted to give him an out for him to rethink. So I smiled and grabbed my purse and started to move towards the door. New guy who was standing in the doorway did not budge though. He started talking though about his son, about the money trouble he'd been having, and then capped the whole story off with a request for a loan. Now, from the tone of his voice, it was clear this was not a loan. He was demanding money from me. He said that he would pay me back as soon as he got paid and that I'd really be helping him out. I really didn't know what to do. He had me trapped. I wasn't leaving the office or the building unless he allowed it. Or at this point at least, I wasn't leaving without a fight. Something told me it was a height difference. I wasn't going to win. So I decided to give him something in my wallet. It was around $50, I think. When I gave it to him, he then said,
Thanks. You're really helping me and my son. I won't forget it.
But when he said it, he had no expression, no smile, and no speech effect at all. He didn't seem grateful or even relieved, just dead eyes and limp arms at his sides. It was terrifying. To this day, I don't really remember how I got him to the door. All I remember was shutting the door behind him, making sure the door was securely locked, and then rushing into the office to burst into tears. I didn't finish my work, but I stayed
That was a
there
good
until I
end.
forced myself to leave out of that same door. I was pretty sure he was going to jump me when I left. The thought never occurred to me to